Hey, Amanda.
Hey, Dave.
There we go. Let's see. Hi, guys.
Everybody.
Hey, Adam.
Hi, everybody.
Chris, thank you for your latest adamancy.
What was that?
What?
What was
I
that
said thank-
Scrabble word?
Yes.
I don't actually know whether it's a word. But it's a play on being adamant. I said thank you for your adamancy.
I think that's a word.
It should be if it's not.
Yes.
I thought it was a combination of adamant and immediate,
I once wrote
which
a
it was
paper
kind
in
of both.
college. And it starts with Adam, so it's a good word no matter what. So
It's biblical.
that's it. I once wrote a paper in college, and the
once read a
professor,
paper.
the teacher, what?
I said I once read a paper in college.
That's a good thing. Anyway, I don't remember at all why. It was a long time ago. Why I was in the professor's office, and it was a sheet going over it, and she said, "What does that word mean?" I said, I said what it meant, and she said, "I'm not sure that's a word." And I said, and I remembered. I said, "Don't you think it should be?" And I defined it. She said, "Yeah, it's a good word."
Well, they're
So
always adding new.
Yeah.
They're always adding new
Reinforcement
words
make
to.
up words.
They're always adding new words to Merriam-Webster.
Have you
Absolutely.
seen the
Absolutely.
movie? It's so shoot, I forget the name. It's something in a madman, and it's the story of Oxford about the dictionary, how the original very first dictionary. What's his name? Oh God, I'm drawing a total blank. It's a great movie, especially if you're interested in words and the history of words. It's a fascinating movie. It's also got a lot of drama to it too, as well. One of the original primary contributors to the original Oxford Dictionary was actually a man who had been institutionalized, and he just started contributing words through the mail, and they didn't know who he was. And then finally the guy who was putting the
John Penn and Mel Gibson, right?
Yes, Mel Gibson. Yes. Great movie.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. If
I
you
was
haven't,
kinda
I read
hoping
the
it was-
book first.
I was kind of hoping you were going to say it was Robin Williams, but okay, Mel Gibson will work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great movie.
Given no other choice. Anyway, so Daniel, so everyone knows, Daniel is going to be coming in late. He is in a meeting with the Inc. folks in Jersey right now. I just left the meeting to join us, and he should be coming along, but probably not for another 15-20 minutes. So we will dig into the agenda before he shows up. Let's give it just, yeah, we see the agenda, thanks. And I'll probably hand the keys to Brian to get started, if that's okay. And then Brian, early on, I would like to just show people the really, truly almost finished scan report and show you what that looks like. And the Professor and the Man, great title, huh? The Professor and the Madman, it's a great title. Anyway, and that'll be my piece. I'll explain what we're doing, what the dissemination piece looks like, etc. But we'll get to that. Let's just
can we
wait a
do
couple
that as
minutes.
part of the Unify working group status stuff, and we'll just let you go first on that?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Okay.
so I'm handing you the reins, Brian, to get started whenever you want. It's 5 after, maybe wait another minute, but I think everybody's probably here.
Sure. While we're waiting, I'll make a note that just as some reassurance, at the bottom of the agenda, it says that we have no meetings scheduled for November. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have meetings scheduled for November. It's just that as of earlier today, we did not have any featured topics to put into the agenda for those future meetings. Well, we'll get this fixed in the coming week, so that yes, we will have a featured topic next week. We will be meeting next week, and we will get into future versions of the agenda, the schedule. And then I'll touch upon this at the tail end as we're closing out for the day, talking about what the next meetings are going to look like and whatnot.
And we do have some presenters we're planning to invite, just so people know. And if somebody wants to present or knows of an organization or person that they would like us to consider for presentation, we want to hear that too.
And we're also planning on taking a couple of meetings off around Thanksgiving and Hanukkah. We're thinking about taking a couple of meetings off around Christmas and New Year's, just being respectful of everybody's holiday plans.
And because we don't want nobody to show up.
Well, yeah. But we will be having meetings in October, in November and December, just not every single week. Okay, I think we've kind of hit a good enough quorum here with 24 people. So let's call it to order and ask, do we have anybody new that wants to introduce themselves to this rabid crowd here?
No one new?
Yeah,
Everybody's a return visitor?
yeah, I can do that. This is Shubhankar Sarkar.
Great.
I think I have met with several of you before. So yeah, I am managing director at EY Technology Consulting, formerly from IBM. And I have known Daniel for quite some time. I have met Adam as well at a couple of conferences. Mary Sarah Jones here is a longtime colleague of mine. So just here to observe and to see what you're working on, and happy to participate in whatever way seems to make sense. So yeah, thank you for letting me join.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
And thank you, Mary Sarah Jones, for giving you a glowing reference here. In the and by the way, Mary Sarah, the name of the new working group you were asking about in the chat is the Direct Trust Information Exchange for Human Services.
Thank you.
And if you'll contact me independently, I can send you additional information if you want to pass that on.
Okay.
To other.
Thank you. I will do that.
Okay. We've got some news and announcements. Daniel's much better at talking about what's going on in the industry, but I can certainly talk up the two items that Amanda popped into the news roundup. CMS has launched a new webpage, basically to share what the various states are doing to expand Medicaid home and community-based services based on the additional money. I think it was around 10% that was chipped into home and community-based services by the this spring's American Rescue Plan Act. So it's a good deal of money going into what is often considered to be human services in the form of Meals on Wheels and support for the elderly, ensuring that they can stay in their homes and not have to camp to nursing homes and other assisted care facilities. So that's it's both the second news item was really just the update this past spring on the American Rescue Plan's additional money for home and community-based services. So those two taken together show that the money is actually starting to be put to use by the states and how the various states are planning on putting that money to use. So I thought that was especially exciting news this particular week. We also have apparently an all-in national meeting agenda. Unfortunately, I don't know what that agenda is because I haven't looked at it. Is there anybody else? Chris, is this something you can report on? Do you know what the agenda
My guess is that, and maybe it's just wait till Daniel gets there, is that Daniel got connected with one of the people who's an organizer of the all-in meeting, and the purpose of the connection was to see how at that national meeting there could be basically opportunities to promote the consent scan report. And then there are going to be follow-up DASH, which is the organization that leads the all-in collaborative effort, is very much interested in maybe having a webinar on the consent report, or bringing presentations into the affinity groups. So it just presents another opportunity to pump out information about the consent scan report. That's what I would guess it is. Maybe Daniel's got more info.
And I actually, he may have more info. I glanced at it. I think it's just their straight up agenda without any sort of input from us or thinking yet about us. But we are working on what Chris described for sure, and think that we'll be there as well. Chris, is there any update? Do you have any tickets left? Or are you done? Or you were offering?
Yes, we still have we can still sponsor free attendance if anybody's interested. I'll put my email in the chat, and let me know if you want to, upon looking at the agenda, if you want free membership. Let me go, not membership, you know what I mean, registration.
Yeah.
I'm with the the Network for Public Health Law, and we're a member of All In. That's how I come to it.
Thank you. Is there any other news that anybody wants to bring up? Hearing none. Well, last week we had a fun and exciting meeting. To be honest, I don't remember it. It's been an entire week ago.
Wasn't that you? Weren't you presenting?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
I was presenting. No wonder I don't remember it.
Yeah, I was trying to, suppress the memories of that as well.
Sorry, Matt, I've been so deep into this data model and
No, I know. I'm just poking fun at you.
merging things together that, my brain is in a completely different space than what I did a week ago. So yes, last week I did a little piece on ICFIS, the Information Exchange for Human Services, new consensus body under direct trust, and we are once again, I'll just repeat that we're going to have some strategy forum meetings in preparation for that new consensus body, that new standards body. And the dates for those are going to be November 17th at noon. I believe that's a Wednesday, and December 15th, a Wednesday at noon. And from there, we'll decide what we want our schedule to be like as we stand up the formal standards meetings in 2022. And part of the rationale for having these sort of pre-strategy meetings is that under direct trust rules, you need to be a member of direct trust in order to participate in these consensus bodies under its auspices. And we want to make sure that we have some opportunity for the human services community to come together and decide what they want to do in this working group and to create a community of interest for it before we turn around and then start demanding people to open up their wallets. So in any case, we also had a good chat around ontologies and some work that we're going to start doing under for a core ontology over the course of the next couple of months. So a fun and exciting meeting. Anybody else have anything else they want to pitch in about last week? Hearing none, we get into Project Unify status, and we're ahead of schedule. Excellent. I love that in a meeting. Why don't we have Adam talk about the scan report first, the consent scan report, even though he's off the bottom of the screen here. We'll give him pride of place here, and then we can get into the other working group topics.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'll make this very brief because every week I seem to say the same thing. We're almost finished. We are finishing today. So that's
this time you mean it.
Oh, I meant it every time. Don't give me any credit where it's not due. I tell you this, the production process, which I'm closer to than I've probably been to any project like this. And it's also, I observed today that this is the longest piece of work I've worked on other than writing a book. It is crazy. And what I was going to say is I'm very involved now with Amanda, God bless her, with getting this thing over the finish line with the designer, because laying in type in the special program, and you ain't seen sausage being made until you've done this. Every word you changes 83 other things. It's a little insane. Anyway, bottom line is the designer has the final changes, and we expect to put it to bed tonight, which is great news. If there's interest, I can sort of give you a quick flash of the document, but I think I've shown it several times. It's a nicely designed piece. It's going to wind up being shorter, mercifully shorter than the 90 pages which we thought it was going to be, because of type size and layout and so it feels more accessible. And we'll also put together tomorrow probably a shortened version. I wrote an executive summary, so we'll do the executive summary with the table of contents, some graphics, and the recommendations. And so there will be
a minute to show it, because we do have some new people here, and we have some folks that weren't on the last time you gave us a peek.
Sure, I can do that. Now, the version I have on my desktop that I'll show you is one that has some marking. So you'll see yellow in a few places, and that's just because that's, or maybe I think I found a version that doesn't. Okay, let me share. I have it up now.
Okay, we'll just get to see how sausage is being made.
No, I'm not going to show you the sausage. No point. So am I able to share screen? I am. And so here, can everybody see it?
Yep.
All right, making it a little smaller so that you can sort of see the full page of it. That's the cover, folks. And then thanking everybody who, these are the principal authors. It's a longish table of contents. And here's the executive summary. This is just 4 pages of synopsizing everything. It's synopsizing main points of the report. Here are all the organizational participants. And then we go into the report. This is sausage being made. These logos moved past this next page. You don't care. You should not care. And then we get into the report per se. And it just keeps going and going with graphics and readout quotes. And we think that it's, rereading it for the 40th time, it really has an extraordinary amount of good content. I have no idea who's going to read all these pages, but they'll look at the executive summary. And for those people who do, I think it's really a rich document. And as somebody said the other day, I don't remember who, I'll talk about this in a second. Somebody said the other day, this just really, there's nowhere to go for content like this. I mean, you can get bits and pieces here and there, but this is, I think, bringing something genuinely new and useful to the field. So it's pretty cool. So one of the very last editions, I'll just point this out, was thanks to Paul. We had access to a group of people in the Bronx that we interviewed one evening, and led to this really valuable contribution to the report. People from what we have come to know as people with lived experience, which I've unilaterally changed, and in all the groups I'm participating in various places, to people with lived expertise. And I urge everybody to consider using that if it's appropriate in your own worlds. I think it gives people more credit, the credit they deserve, and it more differentiates why we're talking to these folks. Because lots of people, when they hear people with lived experience, say, well, I have experience too. I know, but we know what we mean. And I think the term gives it its due a bit better. Anyway, so we had an interview with a half a dozen, and it led to just a few pages of what they had to tell us, voices from the community. And these quotes are quite wonderful that we pulled out. They talk about we talk a lot about data and processes. They talk about relationships. So I think it's a very nice addition. And I think after calling that out, so the only other things that I'll point out real quick, and it looks at all the organizations and efforts that we interviewed for and looked into. And I'm going to get there here. The appendices, this isn't so this is participants, resources, and I think this will be a real contribution, a pretty good glossary, a couple pages of terms for people who aren't as conversant with every little bit of technology that we put out there. The designer was very funny. She said, she's terrific. She said, I don't understand a word of this. Okay, not meant for her, apparently. Okay, and with that, thank you enormously. I do this every week, to everybody who participated in this, who contributed to this. It really, really is a team effort in a big way. And I think that the product warrants the work that was put into it. So that's all. Thank you enormously. And if anybody has any questions, obviously, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, just Adam, what's the timing on release? Do you know?
Well, yeah, I have a good idea. I don't know for sure because we need to submit it to RW. It's a submission to RWJF too, in conjunction with the grant. So we're giving it to them probably tomorrow. The plan is to Daniel and I are going to write a blog, to announce it, and I want to talk about that for a second. And I think next week, barring anything. And if it fades from there, it's not going to be for much longer. I mean, it's going to be ready. So what I want to say is repeat with a little detail what I said last week, which is that, as grateful as we are for your contributions, we're going to ask one more thing of you, and that is help with dissemination. If people want to write blogs for your own purposes, for your own newsletters to your own constituencies, that would be great. Stewards will volunteer my time. If anybody wants some work writing or editing, I'm happy to help. So blogs, newsletter entries, please post it, your LinkedIn accounts, your Twitter feeds, your social media. We want to get this out into the world in a serious way. And most of you are contributors. So there's a real way that you can connect yourselves to this work and hopefully do yourself some good in the process of putting it out into the world. And, you know, we're happy to join in. Other people, we're going to organize a webinar series, but we're obviously also very happy to participate in other people's. And I'll be sending out an email within the next few days to everybody, because obviously we only have 20 some people here, and we had some real multiple of that participants. So we'll send out an email in the next few days spelling out, you know, what ways you can help disseminate, and maybe with some hashtags and other guidance for people who want to participate. And that's the ball game. So thank you, and I'll hand the baton back to, unless there are any other, other questions.
Hey, Adam, this is Ed. Does RWJ want to have any kind of a meeting or conference or discussion after the release of this paper? Will they be involved in the PR activities and follow-up?
I am talking to their communications folks tomorrow. We shall see. I hope so.
Great.
I have proposed a tentative feature topic for a November Unify meeting for reviewing consent scan report workshop presentation, with the expectation that we'll either have to present it to R.W. Johnson or to the ONC or whoever else comes along.
Yeah, all of the above. All of the above.
Well,
and actually, yeah, as I think of it, I mean, it doesn't have to be soon, but there's plenty of fodder in there for presentations for this meeting going forward.
Now, one of the good things is, having gotten the scan report done, we can now apply the considerable amount of effort that we've been putting into this report back into other Unify working groups. And so I'm rather hoping that in the coming month or so, we can start relaunching the consent governance working group to define business requirements and address legal issues, et cetera, for consent. And at the same time, or slightly after that, relaunch the consent technology working group to start working on a blueprint for how do you implement a consent services utility that we describe in the scan report. So I guess that's a little forewarning that I'm hoping in the coming few weeks, the chairs of those two groups, of which I happen to be one of the co-chairs of each of them, will actually get their act together and relaunch these working groups with the intent of making some specific progress on specifications that ultimately we can unleash upon the world at large, to point out that we've actually learned something from the scan report, and this is what we learned. You know, consider it good advice. So if anybody's interested in kind of getting involved or re-involved in those, feel free to drop me a line, or Tom, who's my co-chair on the consent technology working group, or Jennifer, who's my co-chair, I think, on the consent governance working group. The other two topics that are on the agenda for
And Brian,
yes.
Just I think it would make sense. It would be great to have sort of a calendar, you know, not immediately, but, you know, sometime in the, you know, in the next few weeks or whatever, just sort of a calendar idea of timing sequence for those activities, just so we can, especially with holidays coming up, as Adam was mentioning early on in the meeting, be nice to be able to navigate around those.
I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that we have been lax about is actually giving ourselves targets to hit. And as a consequence, if you don't have a target to hit, if you don't have a deadline, you don't you don't always make good progress. So I think once we stand up these working groups, one of the things that each is going to have to do is say, here's when we're planning on hitting this milestone, then the next milestone, then the milestone after that, and how that all is going to play together across the two different working groups. So I really want to see us produce these blueprints that we've been talking about for the last 2 years.
Agreed.
So, and I also, Ed, I know that we have a very interested group in the form of the Interop community,
Yes,
a community of practice for consent out there. So,
yes.
you know, if we don't do our jobs here, we're going to have to do our jobs over there.
Right, and I do very much look forward to us all working together towards our goals, and the exact nature of how we work together, I know, is being discussed, but I'm totally confident that we're going to be able to make some really significant progress together, and I really look forward to that. And that's another reason why I brought up the calendar idea, because, you know, if we have a calendar for what we're up to going into, you know, Thanksgiving and the holiday season, and then on into next year, I think we'll be able to coordinate our activities and set those goals that you're talking about, Brian, a lot more clearly, and achieve those goals.
Sounds good. I guess the last two topics on the working group status are the education domain working group and the child welfare domain working group. Dwayne, I don't think you were here last week. We're in parallel with the education domain working group. We're going to be standing up a child welfare domain working group. And I thought that, especially as we are starting to make some progress within the ontologies working group, it would be good to get the education and child welfare domains more active to create a body of subject matter experts in these two different domains, so that the technologists over in the ontology working group have some place to turn to with questions and with requests for requirements. So Dwayne, are you still interested in driving the education working group? And if so, is there any chance that the education working group can become active again?
I will not let me unmute. I am interested in definitely being part of it. Driving, I don't know, but being part of it, yes. With whatever needs to take place. I know I don't know how many months ago it was, we were looking basically at a spreadsheet of elements, and that was kind of where we had stalled at that point, and just needing to get more clarification on what they mean as far as kindergarten readiness and proficiency, and how, if that's the limit of the elements that we need, or if we need to go any further than that as far as the use case is concerned. I want to go to the ontology working group. I've not had opportunity to be able to attend any of those. They always seem to be at a time on a Friday when I can't be there to help kind of participate in that. But yeah, I'm happy to move whatever we need to do with education forward. But I think I probably need more context around what you need from me or from others in that space.
Let's chat offline and we'll see how we can get this moving. And for the child welfare domain, we clearly need to attract a body of subject matter experts in that area as well. But to kind of get it off the ground, I was wondering if some combination of Robin and or Asaya, or who have been both working on a child welfare ontology within the ontologies working group, and or Adam, who's got a lot of experience in child welfare, might be interested in sort of leading the charge for standing up that domain and trying to attract some additional participants.
Brian, this is Robin. So as far as the child domain, I agree with you. I think there's domain expertise that's needed, but in pediatrics, you know, they make definitions by some of the measures within the child, or like the concepts but the whole definition of child welfare really is a public health program. And so a lot of the guidelines are found in Bright Futures, which is like, that would be an avenue to explore. But the largest thing with the materials, like if you go through the AAP or the Bright Futures, there's fees associated with using the materials, so that you're able to use it for educational purposes, but for business purposes, having a plan ahead of time and a budget, would help, to move it forward if that's the approach we wanted to use. But I think I have explored a little bit. The Schuler Institute had expertise with data, but not necessarily through the data, they're coming up with domain concepts. And so so that's kind of the domain expertise that we're using is more from data scientists and health policy individuals. So there's a lot of different stakeholders that could probably be brought into the table. And then I think with the most recent meeting, Asaya and Chris Connor was a good addition, are working on, like the ontology coding concept and have the IT background for it. I don't have the IT background for it, but I'm following it along. And if I can help out with, like the domain expertise, I'm happy to help. So.
Well, this is not an child welfare ontology work. It's really as a place to attract additional subject matter child welfare.
Brian, your
Unstable.
your audio.
All of you guys have frozen on me. So I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to
Brian. Yeah, that's you, Brian. That's your end.
Did you hear me, Adam?
I heard you say, "Did you hear me, Adam?" But nothing before that.
You're good. I think you're good now. Go
Daniel,
ahead.
Daniel, you want to take the somebody?
I think Brian, keep going. I think you're fine.
Okay.
Me, that's great, but I can't hear anybody responding to me. Why don't, if I pronounced your last name correctly, he solutions, and they are currently working on both layered schema approaches to managing information and developing privacy conscious capture, processing, and exchange of data. Are you ready and able to present, Barack?
Okay, yeah, I thought you were talking about me. I heard half of what you said. Yes.
Barack, would you mind reintroducing yourself? Because we only caught part of Brian's attempted introduction.
Yes, so I myself is a software engineer, and we started the Cloud Privacy Labs a few years ago, working on privacy technologies. Lately, we got involved with more interoperability and privacy issues. Today, what I will present you is the consent grid product that we've been working on for the last couple of years. This project started as a primarily health data exchange, but then it grew into, the idea grew into more general data exchange. And then part of this, what was that? So this grew into more of an interoperability project. And earlier this year, the layered schema approach, which grew from the consent grid product, got the ONC's Deep Award this year for health data interoperability. So today I will try to show what consent grid is and how how it can work with data exchange. Am I audible? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Okay.
Yep.
So
Cheers.
this is a quick presentation. So as I said, consent grid, we started working on it for general data exchange, and it has three main components. The leftmost part is the privacy portal, which is the consumer or patient-facing part of consent grid, mainly focusing on consent entry. The consent grid does not come with a predefined consent model or consent forms. So you build it up as you go. This is a whole API platform. Let me do this. API platform where once you start using it, you can define your own consent model and your own consent forms. So the privacy portal assumes that there is a host application, and this host application will include these consent forms in its own screens or in its own interface. So these can be multilingual consent forms, and in the privacy portal, users can enter their consent and manage their consent lifecycle, like cancel their consent or add additional consents for different subjects. So that's the left side is the patient-facing side. The middle part is the administrative part of it, which is, for instance, in the healthcare domain, it could be an HIE or a healthcare provider, where they define their consent model, what type of consents they're gonna ask, or what information are they gonna capture in their consent model. So as I said, there is no fixed consent model. So they can use consent models based on FHIR's consent. It can be simple consent like yes or no type consent, or it can be as arbitrarily complex consent models. This part also defines contextual consent decisions. So there are cases where even though you gave consent, you have to override those consents. So what are the contextual decisions about what part of consent you have to include in your decisions? And then of course, how that consent affects data flow. And that's the third part, which is the privacy controls for data flow. It introduces the idea of executable data exchange policies. And this is the piece that we are working on this year for the ONC LEAP grant. These executable data exchange policies turned out to be a real good tool for interoperability, semantic interoperability, where you can annotate and modify data without looking at its input structure. So we can actually deal with things like CSV files or XML files or JSON FHIR data. So this part deals with granular consent application onto data. So you can redact or de-identify data based on policies or consent. This is what the architecture looks like. And I am familiar with some of the consent platforms in the market out there. Consent grid differs from most of them by the things we omit from the architecture. For instance, authentication, user authentication and identification is part of the host application. Also, data storage is also part of the host application. So the architecture is based on adding the privacy layer on top of an existing application. And we designed this with HIE use case scenarios in mind. They all have different types of applications, usually multiple applications that deal with the actual data exchange and the data aspects of the business. So this only adds the privacy layer on top of what they're already doing. And the privacy portal integrates with the host application authentication system and the UI to provide the user interface. And then the data flow aspect, again, integrates with the host application, and the application still continues to manage the data flow, but as data moves between databases or moves between partners or used within the system, privacy controls are added to data in motion, not when it's sitting somewhere. So Privacy Portal, as I said, it integrates with the host application using APIs. These are user interface APIs. So you can actually implement all these kinds of consent forms using this and embed it into existing application. So this is like simple, do not sell my personal information, 242 CFR Part 2 kind of detailed information, because the system works on works with schemas. You define a schema defining your consent, so you can actually define what your consent looks like. For example, we did a proof of concept with a fertility clinic where they asked like 20, 30 fields about on their consent form, including what type of eggs are they going to use for the treatment and whether or not they want to pick and choose the gender of gender, or which eggs do they want to defrost and those kinds of things. So the consent model is not baked into the system. The smart consent piece defines how consent works and how it affects data. So you can put links to your legal policies and agreements. Now, the system works with a single consent, like whenever the user enters the consent, existing consents are canceled and there is only one active consent, or it is possible that the user have multiple active consents, and what happens in that case. So default could be an opt-in and opt-out. So if there are no consent, are you allowing whatever the action is, or are you denying that action? And what type of questions are you going to ask when you capture consent? These are defined as schemas. And then the granular consent aspect of it is that how the consent applies to structured data. So based on the user choices, the system can decide what parts of data are allowed in that particular exchange. The third part is the privacy controls for data flow. This is the layered schema approach I showed 2 weeks ago in the ontology group meeting. And this is based on existing schemas. For instance, you can get a fire schema ingested into the program and then add the privacy layers on top of that schema so that you can classify data. And using those classifications, you can mask certain parts of data and then apply consent to it. Using this architecture, you can implement executable exchange policies, which means if you are exchanging certain data with for instance, a state agency, you can pass that data through this policy evaluator and redact certain parts of it, like you can de-identify the data, or you can add consent layer to it. So once you get your data from your own database, pass it through this filtering system, it redacts certain parts of it, or it even removes people who didn't give you consent to exchange that data. This works on structured data, so it works with XML and JSON, and it's schema driven. So it is not actually limited to healthcare data, or it's not limited to FHIR or CDA architecture. And that's one aspect that that is quite new, I believe, in the market, that the whole schema-based architecture does not really limit you to one standard. So for instance, if an HIE wants to exchange CDA documents with a facility, yeah, they can define their exchange rules and apply consent on that CDA, and the redaction works as expected. And the same thing works for FHIR messages as well. And this is not limited to FHIR data. So if you're, for instance, exchanging social determinants of health data, you can de-identify as data moves from one source to the target. Another aspect of it is that this system works on data in motion, not data at rest. So because of this, there are two parts of it. There is on the top part, there is the consent grid application deployed on a cloud or on a data center. And then the bottom part of it, which actually does the filtering and classification and redaction, that is deployed on the trusted network, whatever the organizational network is. So data never leaves the trusted network. If data exchange happens through trusted channels between two parties, this part, the lower part, works in that network. It doesn't, the data never goes to a cloud server or anything like that. This is an architecture that we showed in a few settings for mainly interagency data exchange involving HIEs and other agencies and providers. Since the architecture is based on data in motion, if there is an exchange hub where these entities exchange data amongst themselves, where this architecture fits in is the actual exchange. So these data exchange policies and privacy filters and consent information can be added and implemented through these links as data are being exchanged. For instance, if an HIE is sending a patient record to a provider, then there is one type of policy that they apply which will not redact much of the fields, but may apply consent to it and send it to that center. Whereas if the HI is doing some reporting for a state agency, then it might do some de-identification on the data, or it might even eliminate some records based on user consent. Are there any questions up to this point?
Yeah, Mary Sarah has one in the in there about what regulations are included. Are there specific ones?
What do you mean by what regulations?
Oh, for the privacy functionality that you discussed, is it a capability to apply privacy regulations, or are there privacy regulations, or is it just the consent? I'm a little confused about what is actually in there.
So there are two aspects to that. So there is the data exchange agreements between parties, which may include regulations, privacy regulations, and consent on top of that. So the data exchange agreement or regulation piece of it is fixed. So as you're exchanging information between two parties, you may pick a policy that applies, for instance, 42 CFR regulations on it by removing all Part 2 data from it. Or it may be that you may remove all personal data from it. So that those parts, the policy part is fixed. On top of that, you may apply consent as the data is being exchanged.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, well, kind of. I'm trying to think through it outside of standard healthcare and apply it to education or human services.
Yeah, so the system does not have any baked in regulations or policies. As I said, it is schema based. So whatever type of data you're exchanging for, I don't know what type of data you exchange in education setting or other settings, but you may define a schema for that data, and you can define privacy attributes on top of that schema as overlays, like this picture here. So the first rectangle here is your base schema, and you may define, for instance, a classification overlay on it that marks certain areas as sensitive or PII or something else, after which then you can apply additional masking based on those classifications and then apply consent to it.
Okay, and can it apply the policy based upon the use? So what I mean, for example, is some data is available for research, but would not be available for treatment.
Let me show that to you.
Okay.
So this is a very simple consent form. I only prepared it for this demo, but for this is my user. As I said, this integrates with other application. So the application identifies this user and shows a consent form. And for instance, this user allows me to share their PII for research purposes. I save this, and there is this one here. And this is based on FHIR. And if I run this data through this API. For this example, the username is PII. This group is defined as PII, and my purpose is research. But for something else, let me find that form. For instance, there's marketing. If you do this for marketing, we don't have the PII. It's gone. So let's switch it. So does this answer that question? So for this, yeah.
So it goes by use case, but then that would be use case to all the users, or
no,
can
for
it,
this user.
for this user.
For
Okay,
this user,
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, when I say PII, this comes back. For instance, if I remove that consent from this user, I say this, and now when I do it for research, this user does not have a name anymore. It's empty.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this is the level of granularity you can do with that layering approach. Another thing I can show is like the part 2 data. So I have another sample form for that here. So this user authorizes disclosure of SUD related information to this particular user, this particular recipient. And if I'm exchanging the data to that particular recipient, then when I send it, this first entry is a drug overdose entry. Let me show, yeah, drug addiction therapy entry. So for this user, that entry is included here. But if I, for instance, send it to test user 2, this is the record. So this is that drug addiction therapy entry here, which is not sent. You can actually remove the whole entry, but this is easier to show. But let's switch it back. Let's say the user does not authorize disclosure, then yeah, this user can no longer receive that. So it is this kind of granular redaction service that can be implemented with this. And as I said, these are all implemented using the administrative interface through this overlay. So there's an encounter SUD classification layer on top of FHIR schema that, for instance, looks at the FHIR label and classifies it as sensitive. It can look at other attributes. For instance, it can look at the codes within the message and then classify it as sensitive data. And these are the data flow policies. Data flow policies are then essentially for each use case, each different use case, you select your overlays to apply different classifications. And on top of that, this becomes your policy. On top of that, you can apply consent information. Any questions?
Question. How do you handle revocations? Revocation of consent?
Yes, so you can pretty much do only revocations in the consent lifecycle management. So exactly like this. So you save another consent saying that you don't authorize, or you simply go and cancel that consent. So in this case, like the 42 CFR case, you can revoke one or multiple of your consents using the patient or the privacy portal. But when it is done, this information is stored in the consent database. So the consent database is centralized. It's stored there. And whenever you do the data flow again, it's the latest form of that consent is used. So that's how we handle revocation, the central consent database. In fact, the consent grid application is the central consent database. It only keeps consent information and nothing else.
Thank you.
How do you handle consent conflict or contention?
Using rules. So let me show you what smart consent is. We called it smart consent because it literally contains some part of code in it. So this is my choice schema, which gives me the information captured in the consent. And this is how I decide consent should be evaluated based on that schema. So this one, for instance, looks at certain things and decides what part of data will be shared or not. Now, if the user has multiple consents and if there are conflicting consent information, for instance, one of them says you can share, the other one says you cannot share, you can choose one of the two things. You can say the latest one wins, or you can say the most conservative one, which is if there is any denial, don't share it. So that's how we resolve it.
So, okay, got it. Thank you.
And this is, we did some proof of concepts with this, but since the ONC project with the layered schema work, our focus has been there, but this has not yet been deployed out in the open. But there is some interest, especially in this aspect of it, because it allows mixing and merging all types of data, not just health data when agencies or organizations are exchanging data amongst themselves.
Barak, a while ago, we were talking about it. One of the examples when Mary Sarah was talking, I was thinking about education data, very simply attendance data, right? You need parent authorization to share real-time attendance data.
Yeah.
How would that fit into that kind of schema and the policy overlays that would be needed? Same thing? Is it different? Is it unique? Or is it just another thing?
It is the same thing. It is, you would simply go here. Well, that data, the attendance data, would probably have some student information at the top, sure, and then some attendance information, maybe a list of attendance information somewhere in the data. So you can come here and you can define a schema here. So for instance, this is the FIRE schema. You define, you first go and define your schema, what your data is, and come here and add it as a new schema. That way we know what data is in there. Once you do that, you come back here and add a new overlay which works on top of that schema that classifies data on that schema, saying, well, these fields are PII, these fields are not PII, or these are sensitive. And then you come back and build your data flow policies, which is if you are, these are basically your data exchange use cases. If you're exchanging with a parent, what type of overlays are you going to do, apply to the data? And if you're changing, for instance, with the district, what type of overlays you're going to put on the data? And when you're exchanging to those targets, you would apply those policies. And that means you simply make an API call. As I said, this is an API platform. You simply say the policy name here, send your data in, and the data comes out as filtered based on that policy.
And where do the audit logs reside of what data is shared?
The audit logs are kept in the cloud with the Consent Grid app here. It is not exactly what data is shared. It is what consent is evaluated and what was the verdict.
So it records the query to the consent registry, but not the data that's actually shared.
Yes, it is this person sent data to this target using this policy. This was the consent that was evaluated, and this is the verdict of that consent.
So you rely on the legacy systems to keep the audit logs of what actual data was sent?
The actual data, we rely on the existing system, the host application, to actually send the data. Right. So this is an intercept model. You intercept an existing data flow.
It's workflow interoperability.
Yes. But we intercept that flow, so we only redact it, so that there is no API dependency or interoperability issues because we work with the existing data. We don't ingest the data, process it, and output it as a different format or anything like that. So there isn't any interoperability issues here. Data comes in and data comes out.
Roger that. But it's important to know what's redacted, and you don't do filtering, right? I mean, it's redaction versus filtering. So all the data is shared, but some of it is redacted.
It can be redacted, like it can be overwritten, or it can be removed.
So that's filtered.
So,
yes. Yeah. It depends on what type of rules you apply. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go back for one more kick at the attendance cap. Say, I'm looking to see Dwayne's not on the call with us now, but for example, one community has 5 different educational software providers for the just within a couple of counties. What are the challenges with sort of intercepting data from multiple systems? For one, let's say one school district, well, multiple school districts, you're looking for common, a common response to all of them.
Yeah, that's a whole different interoperability problem. The naive response would be that you would define one schema for each unique type of data. So if you have 5 different systems with 5 different schemas, you can define those 5 schemas and try to unify the privacy rules on top of that. But as I said, that's a whole different interoperability issue. And yeah, the solution may not be that easy.
So same kind of question, if you're trying to receive information from multiple systems, I'm just trying to think here on the ground where there are obviously multiple school information systems that deliver information within a county. There are multiple, sort of mental health providers or, drug addiction providers, all of whom may have different systems that need to be interoperable, need to share information, whether it's with the state or with other providers. How does that multiplicity of different systems and users take advantage of what you guys have done here? This looks great.
Our ONC LEAP project might be of help here because in the healthcare data domain, that's what we are doing. There are multiple types of providers giving us multiple types of health data, and we are trying to unify it, put it in a data warehouse. This is similar. You can not consent grid, but you can use the layered schemas approach to ingest this data from multiple providers, unify it in a simple, understandable way, and export it so that they can report it to, for instance, a state or exchange amongst themselves. On top of that, you can apply consent and privacy, but that's a different part of the puzzle. The layered schema approach might help there. In that approach, we are using the graph approach as a common base model instead of any structured approach. So different types of messages can be combined and unified semantically using that approach.
Barak, it sounds like one of the challenges that any type of technology would have in tackling human services data that is not always consistently defined across, there's not necessarily agreed upon standards across different human service systems. You still would need to kind of unify these schemas, within, let's say, the education sector or the foster care sector or whatever it might be. And that would be done in your property graph. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, but the idea with the layered schemas is that the belief that there's never gonna be one unifying standard.
Of course,
so so the idea is to be able to work with multiple standards and then reduce it to its semantic basics.
It's definitely a strength. Yeah.
But again, just to play off what Matt just said, Matt, you're sort of answering the question that you asked me. I think the key assumption here is, tell me if I'm wrong, is that it's based off, or it's primarily based off a single host system. So it could work with the HIE, and the HIE's got all the data. And then the HIE is the host system. But if it won't necessarily unify multiple host systems, one for healthcare, one for housing, one for food, because am I correct? I mean, the strength is the more data you can put into the host system, the stronger the tool.
Let me answer it this way. So there are two technologies we are talking about here. The consent grid itself is, as you described, it's based on a host application system. But the layered schema approach, which consent grid uses, and which I described 2 weeks ago in the ontology group meeting, is a multi-host solution where you can make data meaningful coming from disparate multiple sources. So these two are two different things, but together they can solve larger problems. So what I showed you today, the consent grid is a single host solution. That's correct. It's not an interoperability solution. It is a privacy solution. The interoperability piece is a different product.
You say it's. I'm finding that very interesting that you say that, but your property graph still has to model and integrate all these different schemas when you're talking about integrating, operating across multiple sectors, at least in the case of healthcare and human services interoperability. That is a level of semantic interoperability. Yeah. It's also strength of the property graph or the semantic approach. Mm-hmm. So you on a level you are, but you're not, you're what you're saying is you're not sending the data. The privacy solution is not responsible for getting the data from point A to point B. Is that what you mean by it? Is that the distinction?
That is the distinction, correct. But yeah, you can build a solution using two of them so that you have a privacy solution plus a semantic interoperability solution that works all the way. Yeah. What I showed you today is not that.
Is that your intention? Do you see that going that way?
I see that it's going that way. Yeah. That's the intention.
Got it. Cool. Exciting work.
I wonder for other folks from HIEs, I don't know, Kathy, if you're still on the phone with us, that concept of what Daniel was just saying around, because the HIE is one source, does that, when you're thinking about, consent and all these multiple different systems coming in and through, what questions come to your mind as you're hearing this, if any?
I'm not sure I have questions yet. I'm still kind of trying to wrap my mind about how this could apply to us, how we could use it as a tool to solve some of our problems, particularly ones that we're talking about now with the potential New York State consent model change and manage multiple consents happening in different places and dealing with, the complexity of some of the Part 2 release questions and other sensitive data. So it's definitely, gives us a layer of granularity potential that we don't have today in the way that we're currently set up. So I'm just kind of absorbing it all at the moment.
I didn't know if the light bulbs had gone off yet.
When you turn on the energy efficient bulbs and they take a while and they come up slowly. Yeah. I'm about halfway up in terms of the brightness at this point. So filing it away for future consideration.
Well, I'm just to extend that analogy. I put some a string of lights in my backyard using a solar collector. And not so good on cloudy days. I kind of get a half of the light there, a little bit. So great. Well, that's good to hear. let's see, we're at 5:15, so we're officially now into overtime. I just wanted to just sort of pop back in here. Brian, are you rejoined here by phone or by hook or by crook?
I have rejoined by phone. Isn't technology wonderful? Unfortunately, we're at the tail end of what had been this nor'easter up here, and the local microwave towers just don't like having all this wind buffeting them around. So, you know, the internet's been just a little flaky the last 24 hours. In any case, I did want to thank Barack for a great presentation and for gracefully responding to all of the various questions. Thank you very much. And remind folks that we are having meetings in November, at least the first few weeks of November, and are looking for one or two additional topics, feature topics.
There's another guy with a very similar product to Barack's.
It's interesting because it's so geeky that I can't quite figure out like what it actually is doing.
Okay, so what it is
Oh, hang on. Sonia, Eric, we hear you. Yes, that's fine. Avoid any future embarrassment.
If there are questions, just contact me, and you can find me on LinkedIn.
It's good to be a geek.
I'm having the geek explain it to me right now.
Nobody on these calls ever has said a bad word about geeks.
Oh no, I depend on geeks on a daily basis to help me figure out the tech. So
me too.
Hey, Brock, this is Ed. I was just looking at your LinkedIn, and I see you're located in Englewood, Colorado. Is that right?
That's right. Well, DTC, Denver.
Pardon?
Denver area, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I've been out of town for a couple of months, but I live in Golden, so I am going to reach out to you. I'll be back next week. Love to just connect up and chat a little bit further. So just wanted to put that on your notepad.
All right.
Great.
Yeah.
I wanted to reiterate Brian's appreciation. Thank you for coming on and sharing with pretty short notice too, which is great. And I appreciate your participation in ontologies, and this feeds a lot of the people's thinking here at a level that's really important to stretch what the possibilities are. So obviously we encourage you and everyone else to join the various work, at least one, multiple work groups, but at least one to sort of keep the engine rolling, because we're trying to, and I don't know if Adam said this earlier on, but we are at the goal line here with our consent scan, and we think we will be able to send it off to our friends at RWJF tomorrow, which is great. But it's turned into a excellent working document with a lot of different ideas in it, and having enough people with enough sort of comprehension of the possibilities and the challenges will make it a useful, I think hopefully a useful syllabus as we go forward, maybe with ONC, maybe with RWJF, maybe with others, to actually take these things to scale, or at least take them into pilot in a bigger way and really make them see what works, because there's a couple of really good ideas out there and they seem to be resonating. That's why I was asking Kathy about her response, and especially with the HIE in New York and where they're at on stuff. So thanks, and thanks for everybody's engagement here. A couple of things I would just add before we sign off. One is we're thinking about what else do we want to hear from? Who else would be helpful to hear in more detail these kind of conversations? And so suggestions, ideas, things that are interesting to you, would love to hear about that. I'd love to hear about that. My network is large, but it's growing thin at the edges. I think we've had many people on who are on the scan presented, and actually, Ed, I was going to put you on the spot here, but maybe you and Mary and others from MELD can talk about what's happening there, because we're trying to drive together more and looking at ways that we can do the demonstration, whether or not it's with the LEAP grant folks, with Mohammed and the work you're doing, Brock, and places that are ready to go, ready to do it. When Inc. sites are both of those sites that are on board. So that would be one thing. I also reached out. I think that would be good. You can reserve rights to. Great. So maybe we'll do that next week.
We'll put that on the agenda. Yes, and I've just been talking to them about being able to demo the MELD sandbox, et cetera. I understand it is. I'm just checking it out myself here this next week. So as soon as I do that, I'll be happy to tee it up and schedule it for this group.
Great. He's not on the call any longer. There are a number of sites that are being supported by the Kresge Foundation to do technical assistance. That we're working with them and Evident Change and Aspen to help them think about system change and training around that. I've mentioned ITCC to folks before, Interoperability Training Program. One of the sites has been joining this call on a fairly regular basis last couple of weeks. And I've also reached out to the director in Arlington County, Anita, because they've created a single intake form for all their programs. It's a 2-page intake form, which is not consent, but they're trying to streamline the processes of the people they serve. And one of those ways is the integrated intake. So just tell us everything about what you need. You walk in the front door once. But I was thinking about hearing from sort of county directors or state directors on how they're grappling with it. I know we've heard from our colleagues, Christine, Kathy, and others. Is that interesting to folks? We were talking very technical stuff here, but from a policy and a leadership perspective, would that be useful for folks to hear how they're sort of tackling some of these issues actually on the ground? And a thumbs up or an emoji answer would be useful. I'm just thinking about how do we, shake your head.
Yes,
that'd be a thumbs up would be great. Yeah, that's great, because I think one of the things I'm trying to do, and Catherine's on here from Pima, Arizona, a NIC sponsor and supporter, so welcome. Eventually, Arizona is going to be ready to dive into the POC world. It will be great, for our partners to be in that position to be able to share what is actually like on the ground, front lines doing this work. So that I'm reaching out to those folks and see who may want to join us on this. And then, so over the next couple of weeks, we'll do some of that. We'll have, as Brian said, we'll have probably a couple of weeks off around Thanksgiving. We hopefully will hear more from our colleagues at ONC whether they're going to actually doing something on consent or e-consent this year, maybe mid-December. And if so, then I would probably suggest we spend 1 or 2 sessions, later, probably right after Thanksgiving, preparing for that, for those who are interested. And then the last thing that maybe we'll put on the agenda for next week is some new news that I think is really super interesting. I'm going to put this up on my screen and we'll put the link in for everybody. So I don't know if everybody saw this, but Robert Wood Johnson Foundation just yesterday put out their long-awaited recommendations from the National Commission to transform public health data systems. I'm not sure exactly how narrow or how broadly they're defining public health in this situation. And this is very cool. I think I participated in one of the groups that sort of put information into this group. They had a number of different focus groups over the summer, and I joined them. And they threatened to do something big. And so they just announced a $50 million program that they're going to be launching starting next year, or starting soon. And it's one of the things that they've talked about, if you go look at the stuff, is funding for data infrastructure and systems that are standards-based and interoperable. So to hear that from a major foundation is unique in many ways, in terms of recommendations and stuff they may be supporting. So I'm encouraged to see that RW is at the table doing continuing to do interesting stuff and helping drive the agenda. And I'm hoping that our work will be able to sort of engage them in the work we're doing here. Seems like they have a lot of interest now in a lot of this related stuff, and equity at the center of that. So what I'd like to do is see if we can have some conversation, or maybe around this next week or 2 weeks, or maybe next week even, and just kind of dive into the details of it, kind of uncover specifically in the recommendations, because there's like a 60-page report. My guess is consent is sort of buried in there somewhere, but we've got to look at it, and it'd be good for us to look at it and see where and how we might be able to support those efforts and vice versa there. So I put that out there. Amanda, we'll put that linkage into the notes for the week. And I think it's pretty easy to find online now. So that was kind of interesting and exciting news to see that, the kind of funding that this really deserves in many ways, at least from the private sector. So with that, floor is open. If anyone else wants to say anything, share anything at the last moment here, floor is open. We will see you guys next week. We'll put out the agenda, and hopefully we'll send you a link to the final report, and then start promoting that. Actually, one of the things we'll talk about next week, I'm sorry, is that Adam and company team is going to put together sort of a communication dissemination package for this, so folks can push this thing out to your network.
I did let.
Great, thanks, Adam.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
So that's it. See you guys next week. Talk to you along the way. Have a good rest of the week this week.
Take care, all.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you again.